Black soldier, so proud in his military dress uniform, strolled calmly through the airport. But he was suddenly seized, shoved, and blamed for a theft he didn't commit. The white officers refused to even check his ID. They branded him a liar. They twisted his arms behind his back. It felt like just another day where dignity was denied. If you believe no one should be judged by skin color, hit like, subscribe, and stay for what happens next. Because what comes next is the most satisfying karma you'll see this year. Staff Sergeant David Grant had just exited his flight into the bustling airport terminal. His Army service outfit was flawless, his name stitched in dark thread over his heart. He had just returned home from a tough overseas tour, excited to surprise his mother in Atlanta before reporting back to base in North Carolina. With his duffel bag over his shoulder, he checked his phone for a message from his ride. As he made his way to the baggage carousel, he sensed the tension. The stares weren't admiration. They weren't about military respect. They were suspicion, coded in glares. A cluster of airport guards exchanged glances. A white woman near the cafe clutched her purse tighter. 2 TSA officers followed him with their eyes, never blinking. David had worn this uniform long enough to know what admiration felt like, and this wasn't it. He sighed to himself. Not again. He had endured this before. The disbelief that a black man could serve his country honorably. But something about today felt heavier. The air itself carried a warning. As he stepped near the escalator, a loud bark shattered the air. "Hey, you there, stop!" David froze on instinct, every muscle alert. He turned slowly, raising his hands slightly. 2 cops were marching toward him. Officer Ryan Calder, a big man with a thick mustache, hovered near his holster. His partner, Officer Logan White, lean with piercing blue eyes, fixed a cold stare on David, as if he had already committed a crime. David kept his palms open. He'd learned a long time ago. Move too fast, and it could cost you your life. "Is there an issue, officer?" he asked, his voice composed, but steady. And that's when the real public humiliation began. Perfect. Proceeding with, Officer Calder scoffed. "Yeah, there's an issue. We received a tip about a stolen military uniform, and look at you, walking around like it's yours." David blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Don't act clueless," Officer White added with a sneer. "Where'd you get that outfit?" David stood tall, shoulders squared. "I earned it." Calder let out a sarcastic laugh. "Really? And you think we're just supposed to believe that?" He nodded toward David's duffel bag. "Open that up." By now, a small group of travelers had slowed their pace. Some whispered. Others paused entirely. Phones were being pulled out. One woman had already begun recording. David took a steady breath. "Unless you have probable cause, I don't have to show you anything. You have no legal grounds to search my belongings." White stepped closer, jaw tightening. "Listen here, boy. You're going to do as you're told, or we'll make you." The word boy stung like a slap. David's fists tightened, but he stayed composed. "I'm not a boy. I'm a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. You have no right to intimidate me." Calder grinned like it was a joke. "Well, funny thing, we got a report of a black male pretending to be military personnel. And guess what? You match the profile." Racial profiling. Plain and clear. David's jaw tensed. "So you think I stole the uniform I bled to earn?" White didn't flinch. He grabbed David's arm. "I don't think, I know. Hands behind your back." The crowd let out a unified gasp. A little black boy, holding his mother's hand, stared in wide-eyed fear. It was the kind of stare that saw too much, too young. David refused to resist, but he didn't comply either. "I will not be treated like a criminal. I fought for this nation. I deserve respect." Calder yanked the duffel off David's shoulder, throwing it to the floor. Out spilled a set of military documents, his folded dress blues, and personal items. See? Told you. Fake, Calder sneered. White shook his head. A liar in uniform. Typical. David stared, unblinking. Call my commanding officer. This will be over in seconds. But Calder shoved him against the terminal wall. You're not getting out that easy. White radioed in, voice cold. Gate 4. Suspect resisting. Lies! A voice called out. Everyone turned. An elderly black man, wearing a veteran's cap, stepped forward. The elderly black veteran adjusted his cap and stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. I've been watching this whole mess, he said. That man hasn't resisted a thing. The officers paused, momentarily thrown off. A ripple of crowd reaction followed. Voices murmured in agreement. More phones rose into the air. A woman's voice rang out, sharp and accusing. That's racial profiling! But Calder and White didn't blink. Calder yanked out his cuffs. White twisted David's arm hard behind his back. David clenched his jaw, refusing to cry out. Enough was enough. You have no clue who I am, David said, his tone turning to steel. Calder rolled his eyes. Sure we do. You're a fraud. That's when another voice echoed through the terminal, deep, commanding, and unmistakably in charge. Unhand that soldier. Silence fell like a curtain. All eyes turned as a tall, broad-shouldered black man in a police captain's uniform approached with authority. His badge gleamed under the terminal lights. The nameplate read, Captain Reggie Lawson. Calder and White froze like statues. Captain, Calder stammered. Lawson's eyes burned like embers. I said, unhand that soldier, right now. Reluctantly, the officers released David. He straightened his uniform, his arms sore from the rough treatment. Captain Lawson stepped closer. Are you all right, Sergeant? David nodded. I'm fine, sir, but these men just assaulted me, falsely accused me of a crime, and disrespected my service. Lawson's jaw flexed with anger. You two, my office, now! White started to protest. But sir, now, Lawson thundered. The terminal seemed to exhale. Calder gulped hard. White's face drained of color. They turned and began walking, dragging their shame behind them. Lawson faced David again. You have my word, Sergeant. What they just did, they won't get away with it. Then the terminal erupted into applause. Some clapped, others cheered. A few shouted, Thank you, and That's justice! The elderly veterans in the crowd beamed, standing tall with pride. David closed his eyes for a brief moment. The public humiliation still stung, but the tide was turning. He could feel it. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to hope. But justice wasn't done yet, not even close. Inside the Atlanta Airport security office, the tension was suffocating. Officers Ryan Calder and Logan White sat rigidly on hard metal chairs, their faces pale and tight. Across from them stood Captain Reggie Lawson, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Staff Sergeant David Grant leaned silently against the wall, his frame steady, his uniform still crisp despite the officer abuse he had just endured. He wasn't here just to be consoled. He was here for accountability. The office door creaked open, and in walked a short, stocky white man in a dark blue business suit. His badge glinted. Chief Gerald Harmon. Harmon scanned the room, then locked eyes with David, then the two seated officers. "Tell me what happened," Harmon said, his voice calm and cold. Before Calder could speak, Lawson stepped forward. "These officers falsely accused an active duty soldier of theft, manhandled him in front of a crowd, and attempted an arrest, all with zero evidence." Harmon's eyes narrowed. "Is that true?" Calder swallowed. "Sir, we were following up on a report of a stolen uniform. This man matched the description." "Really?" Harmon's voice stayed quiet, but cut like glass. "Because I reviewed surveillance on the way here. From what I saw, the only thing this sergeant was guilty of was walking through this airport while black." Calder and White went stiff. their faces drained of color. "And not only did you shame a decorated soldier, but you lied in your report, said he was resisting," Harmon continued. "That's falsifying an official statement." White bolted upright in his chair. "We didn't mean—" "Sit down," Harmon snapped, his voice like a crack. White sat, mouth clenched shut. Lawson folded his arms. "You didn't even check his military ID. You assumed he was a fraud because he was a black man in uniform." Harmon turned to David. "Sergeant Grant, I sincerely apologize on behalf of this department. You were mistreated, and this will not be ignored." David's eyes met his. "Apologies don't undo what happened. These men need real consequences." "They'll get them," Harmon assured. Then he turned back to the two officers. "Effective immediately, both of you are suspended without pay, pending internal investigation. If found guilty of discrimination or abuse of authority, you're finished." Calder leapt to his feet. "Sir, this isn't fair." Harmon's voice was cold steel. "You don't know unfair, yet." Chief Harmon didn't blink. He grabbed a thick folder from the edge of the desk and slammed it down. "You think I'm bluffing?" he said, glaring at Calder. "This file contains prior complaints, not one or two. Racial profiling, excessive force, misconduct. And now this? You humiliated an American hero." White's fists curled in his lap. "This is unfair." Captain Lawson stepped forward, fire in his eyes. "You think unfair is being accused of stealing your own uniform in front of a crowd? You think unfair is being slammed against a wall, treated like a criminal, when you've done nothing wrong?" His voice lowered, but hit harder. "You don't know unfair, but you will." Silence fell again, heavy and thick. Calder lowered his head into his hands. White sat stiff, jaw locked, the tremor in his arms betraying his fury. Chief Harmon pointed toward the door. "Get out, both of you." With nothing left to argue, Calder and White stood and walked out, dragging their disgrace with them. But before they reached the hallway, David called out, voice calm, but razor sharp. "Hey, officers." They stopped and turned slowly, faces twisted with resentment. David stepped forward. "Next time you see a black man in uniform, show some damn respect. We serve this country too." The door shut behind them with a thud, like punctuation. Lawson let out a long breath. Harmon massaged his temples. "Sergeant Grant," Harmon said, "if you ever need anything, reach out. This department owes you." David nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Chief. But what I really want is for this to stop happening to people who look like me." Lawson walked over and laid a firm hand on David's shoulder. "You're right. It's far from over. But today, we took a step in the right direction." David nodded once more. He wasn't under any illusion. Systemic racism, police brutality, and abuse of power didn't end in that room. But this time, public humiliation didn't win. Truth did. And he wasn't alone. Outside that office, the crowd still buzzed with energy, the echoes of viral justice replaying in whispers and shared videos. David bent to pick up his duffel bag, and for the first time in hours, the burden on his chest felt just a little lighter. As David walked out of the security office, the terminal looked different. Same people, same walls. But the weight of the moment shifted the air. The travelers who had seen it all began parting in silence. Phones were still out. Some captured him walking, others just stood, eyes wide with quiet recognition. Whispers followed in his wake. That was the guy. He didn't fight back. He stood his ground. He's a real hero. David didn't walk faster or slower. He moved with dignity, with purpose. His uniform, slightly wrinkled now, still carried the power of military respect. Some children pointed. A few adults placed hands over their hearts. An elderly white man in a Korean War veteran's hat stepped forward and gave David a firm salute. David returned it, crisp and respectful. This was more than patriotism. This was what it looked like when truth cut through prejudice. From the far side of the terminal, the same young black boy who had watched in fear earlier was now beaming. His mother knelt beside him, whispering something into his ear, pointing at David with pride. David gave the boy a nod. One nod. That's all it took to say everything. He could feel something had changed. Not enough. Not everywhere. But right here, in this place, power had shifted. He kept walking. Past the gate. Past the shop. Through the crowd that refused to look away this time. This wasn't just a walk anymore. It was a statement. One the internet would replay again and again. Crowd reaction grew behind him. Applause, a few cheers. A woman shouted, "Thank you for your service!" David didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The crowd saw what had happened. And for once, they didn't stay silent. When he reached the main exit, his phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "Mom, can't wait to see you. Proud of you always." David smiled faintly. He wasn't a headline. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't a profile. He was a soldier. A black man. And today, he was finally seen. But even as he stepped outside, the story wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Because viral justice doesn't end at the airport gate. Back inside the airport, the aftermath was still unfolding. Travelers who had witnessed the scene uploaded videos. Within minutes, hashtags like #military respect, #racial profiling, and #justice. For David began trending. Clips showing the public humiliation and final power reversal were already gaining traction. In the security office, Captain Lawson and Chief Harmon stood over the terminal computer, reviewing footage once more. "He never resisted," Harmon said, his voice low. "Not once." Lawson nodded. "And still they branded him a criminal." Harmon leaned back in his chair. "This isn't just about two bad cops. This is about a system that lets them act without consequences." Lawson's jaw tensed. "Then let's make sure that stops. Starting now." Across town, the department's legal office received a flood of emails and calls. Civil rights organizations were reaching out. News stations were already requesting interviews with Sergeant David Grant. He didn't ask for any of this. But his heroism had struck a nerve. Meanwhile, Calder and White sat in silence in the department's waiting room, pale and shaking. Their suspension notices clutched in trembling hands. White looked at Calder. "You think we're done?" Calder didn't answer. He just stared ahead, expression blank. Outside, David stood beside the curb, waiting for his ride. His phone buzzed again, another message, this time from his commanding officer. "Heard what happened. Proud of you, Sergeant. I'll handle the brass." David smiled. Support from inside the service meant everything. A black SUV pulled up, and his ride, an old friend in uniform, stepped out. They hugged, no words, just understanding. "I saw the video," his friend said. "You okay?" David nodded. "Better now." As they loaded the bag into the car, a reporter jogged up, mic in hand. "Sergeant Grant, one question. What would you say to people who think what happened was just protocol?" David paused, eyes locked on the camera. "I'd say look again. Look at what happens when color matters more than character. And tell me that's protocol." No one said a word. The silence was louder than applause. David stepped into the car. The door shut. But as the vehicle pulled away, the story was only growing, and the whole nation was watching now. By the next morning, David Grant's story was everywhere. News anchors discussed the incident on live television. The clip of him being handcuffed, staying calm, then being defended by Captain Lawson had over 5 million views in less than 12 hours. The caption read, "Black soldier wrongfully detained. Watch what happens next." Social media exploded. Veterans posted side-by-side photos of themselves in uniform, captioned, "This could have been me." Hashtags like #systemic racism, #military respect, and #viral justice dominated the trending pages. Some called David a hero. Others called for the officer's arrest. What no one could do was ignore it. At the Pentagon, higher-ups in the Army saw the video, and they were furious. A memo went out. "Protect our soldiers, on and off duty." In the Atlanta Police Department, the internal investigation was now public. Calder and White had been officially named, their records exposed, and the consequences were closing in fast. Meanwhile, David sat quietly at his mother's kitchen table. She poured him coffee like she always did, like nothing had changed. But her eyes held the weight of what the world had just seen. "You didn't have to say anything," she said softly. "I didn't," David replied. "They did." He took a slow sip and stared at the TV, where a talk show host was tearing apart the officer abuse caught on film. Across town, protests had begun. Peaceful, but pointed. Signs reading, "Respect Black Veterans" and "Accountability for All" waved above the crowd. Young people, old veterans, teachers, ministers, all standing in unity. Not just for David, but for every black soldier, every wrongly accused man, every silent story that never got told. Captain Lawson watched from his precinct office, the footage replaying on loop. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes said it all. Truth mattered again. In a nearby diner, two officers sat quietly, watching the same news broadcast. Calder leaned back, hollow. "We didn't even think twice." White didn't reply, because now everyone was thinking. Twice. Or more. And the system? It was shaking. This wasn't just about a uniform. It was about dignity, justice, and a country finally starting to listen. At Atlanta City Hall, the press conference was standing room only. Microphones lined the podium. Flashbulbs popped. Protesters chanted outside. Chief Harmon stepped forward, flanked by Captain Lawson and the city's mayor. "This department does not condone racial profiling, officer abuse, or any form of systemic racism," Harmon began. "What happened to Staff Sergeant David Grant was unacceptable, and we are taking action." The room held its breath. "The officers involved have been terminated, and we are recommending criminal charges for false arrest and misconduct." Gasps echoed. Power reversal. Made official. Harmon stepped back. The mayor took the mic. "To every soldier watching this, especially those from communities of color, know this. You are seen. You are valued. This city stands with you." The crowd erupted. Across the country, the news spread like wildfire. National broadcasts aired full segments. Late-night hosts recapped it. Celebrities tweeted support. Veterans posted videos in tears. David watched it all from the corner of his mother's living room, still in jeans and a hoodie. He didn't feel famous. He felt tired. His mother entered quietly. "You changed something," she said. He shook his head. "I didn't. They did. When they chose to treat me like I didn't belong." Outside, a crowd had gathered on their street. They weren't reporters, just neighbors. Veterans. Kids holding signs that said, "Justice for Sergeant Grant." David stepped onto the porch. A wave of applause rose. Some saluted. Others clapped. But David raised his hand, not to silence them, but to thank them. He spoke with clarity, no mic needed. "I didn't go through this to be a hero. I went through it because that's what happens when color blinds judgment. But I'm still standing, and so are all of you." Applause again. From the edge of the crowd, a young black boy in an oversized ROTC jacket raised his hand and shouted, "Thank you for fighting back!" David smiled. "I fought before. I'll keep fighting." Behind him, Captain Lawson stood quietly. He knew this wasn't just a moment. It was a movement, and every second forward was built on what David refused to let slide. Because sometimes the loudest protest is simply standing tall. Days later, the dust had not settled. It had erupted into purpose. David Grant's story was now part of national conversation. Schools used the footage to teach racial awareness. Police departments across the country began reviewing their bias training. His name trended not as a victim, but as a symbol of dignity and resistance. David didn't return to base right away. Instead, he accepted an invitation to speak at a community forum in Atlanta. The auditorium was packed. Students, soldiers, parents, reporters, all waiting for the man whose silence had spoken louder than any speech. He walked to the podium in full uniform. Applause thundered, but when he raised a hand, the room fell still. He scanned the crowd, then spoke slowly. "I didn't come here to inspire," he began. "I came here to remind that military respect should never be questioned based on skin color. That officer abuse isn't just about bruises, it's about stolen dignity. And that justice shouldn't go viral. It should be normal." The audience didn't cheer immediately. They listened, absorbed it. Then came the standing ovation. In the back, Captain Lawson watched with pride. Chief Harmon stood beside him, arms folded, nodding. After the event, a young white soldier approached David. "I'm sorry," he said, voice trembling, "for what they did, and for how many times I stayed quiet when I saw it happen to others." David placed a hand on his shoulder. It's never too late to do the right thing. Later that night, David walked out alone into the quiet Georgia air. He looked up at the stars. "They tried to strip me of my dignity," he whispered. "They tried to turn me into another headline, but what they didn't count on was the truth." Behind him, a mural now covered the airport wall, a painting of David standing tall in uniform, fists unclenched, face calm. The words beneath read, "They handcuffed a soldier. The nation unlocked justice." He walked past it one last time, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. This wasn't just his story. It was every story that had gone unseen, until now. Because this time, when they tried to silence him, the crowd refused to look away. And Karma, dressed in uniform, came right on time.